그래. 어야.
No, gangi dozi nyesone dawa tangje pangbeji tambe june de kodam de la jaze tuni ninje zundo jobe dam che senze chana bemo tinze yatsu la o do xian de lun ro sho sai ji be ye ju me do zhang zhi zha li xi ni de jian ban san ye xin du me de wa ye ro gu nam da xin zhi ba ra shu chi ma qin be zha yin sen jie dong ye da ji shu ge wa xi wa chang ye su shi de zhe ji shu ju ru ji
어야. 두세. 다들이 아저씨들 주변에서 진이 남주하다 루주소 그게 전지시하체 다 투셔진도 지겨래. 다 들이대 냐라 나ям다 좀 먹고지도 하네. 나바실로 둥겨 말이. 인다들이 자기도 하네. 도선 루주소 내게 시야지. 다 도시 들여다 가지고 도시 눈이면 다시롱소지 되지 쉬야체 인터넷 슈데 조절이 쉬야지 대역사도 전다들이 말한조다 뷰리 차대 요리 아니 히말라야 리균에 패지 미지리 유기리 간다 말아서 되지 아니 내는 유다 왔을 때기 세계 성장감을 아니 야사다 총서견 배서대 아니 총서견체 제 이내 가당 알아서 배버려야 뷰이 수도 그거지. 뭐지 럽치부 통기. 세계 성장감을 이 뷰이디 계의를 뺐던 매버체 야랑 야저 중공서로 세대들이 이게 야가기 아니 이양도 세지에 대해 이게 돼 메시지.
So Tibetan script was based on Indian script. During the time of Jisung Detsen,
Pali Kerlavaro to the Mugubajani. Pui Ranganala, the Lejada, any Pali Shumna.
Without having to resort to any other language, like Sanskrit or Pali, so that the Tibetans could study Buddhism based on our own language. Some of my friends have told me Master Shankaracharya himself was said to have taken interest in Tibetan language.
Any show to Gavanaya, show you Chisung.
And in the 8th century,
Lejak, Nala Yotebe, Nangbe Shung to the Chata, Bali Shung Nala Yoba to the Chati, Pui Nala Su Guriachi. Senata Kanda,
so
make a lot of Guriche. Any Ganju Budi Galhas Chita, Denju Budi Niger House.
we have over 300 volumes of 100 volumes of Ganjur, the translated words of the Buddha, and over 200 volumes of the translated treatises in our language, so that we are able to study Buddhism in our own language. And as such, how many great masters of Buddhism, both scholars and practitioners, adepts, have been produced. And with regards to logic and epistemology, Master Satya Pandita has written his treasury of logic. And then there are many other commentaries. So with regard to study of Buddhism based on logic and reasoning, it is extant only in the Tibetan tradition and not in the Chinese tradition. And then those who follow the Pali tradition of Buddhism in Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and so forth, they also do not have the study of logic. So I usually say, so they are, I have very good friends from the Pali and Brahma traditions, of Theravada traditions, and because we have become very close friends, I usually tease them. Of course, I do tell them that you do study Buddhism, but you do not have the study of reason and logic, and therefore you don't use logic and reasoning in the study of Buddhism. Therefore, it is like a person without teeth. So if you've come across some hard topics or difficult topics in Buddhism, you cannot chew on it, but you just have to munch on the subject. But in the Sanskrit tradition that we follow, we can scrutinize the teaching. So the fact that we are able to have discussions and dialogues with modern scientists is because we have the tradition of studying the Buddhism and philosophy and so forth through logic, which has come down to us from the times of King Tsong Detsen, who was advised by Master Shanda Rakshita to follow the Buddhist tradition through logic and reason. And so we have the courage or the confidence to have discussions with modern scientists. And then in the Indian tradition, there is great deal of information and knowledge about psychology and meditation. On top of that, when we use logic and Madhyamaka philosophical studies, we can have discussions and dialogues with scientists confidently. So we follow the twin traditions of logic and Madhyamaka philosophy, which are likened to two lions standing neck to neck and crossing their necks together. So we as Tibetans, since the time of our Dharma kings, we have this very sophisticated language and the Buddhist tradition, where the necks of logic and epistemology and Madhyamaka philosophy go neck to neck, cross their necks together. And so when we came into exile, we requested the Indian government headed by Pandit Nehru to establish Tibetan schools separately for Tibetan children. And then in our schools, we have different teachers for the different subjects, modern subjects, and also we appointed teachers for instructing on religion. And then in our monastic institutions of learning, we have many in those days, when we came into exile in the beginning, we had many scholars. In the beginning, many of these monk scholars were working on road construction in Chamba and other areas in India. And so one time I was in Chamba, where there were many of these monks, scholars, and we had actually a debate session on the roadside. So they were not wearing the monks' robes, of course. They were wearing the layperson's chuba. And so so we were at a very critical juncture at that time. Though we had all these monk scholars, the monasteries were not yet set up. But later we did set up the monastic institutions. And in the south of India, we have these great monastic institutions, the seats of learning, as they're called. So today, these monasteries are shining in their pursuit of study of Buddhist philosophy and so forth. And so we have done our best to preserve and promote our religious and cultural traditions. So on top of these traditional studies, we also have incepted the study of science, modern science, in these monastic institutions today. And so I usually tell Buddhists these days that we need to be 21st century Buddhists. So it's been a few decades since I started discussions and dialogues with modern scientists. And so we have lots to contribute to the scientists, modern scientists. And though there may not be so much profound things that we learn from them as such. So today, for the Tibetan youth, we have this teaching of the So in this text, Rinpoche, Master Tsongkhapa, gives his own pursuit of education. May happiness and excellence prevail. The eyes for the world to see the higher realms and freedom of liberation, resting place for those tired from wandering on the paths of cyclic existence, and so forth. So all of us, whether we are whether humans or animals, down to the insects, we all want happiness and do not want suffering. So this is something obvious to all of us. So we as human beings have this marvelous brain with which we can think through, whereas the animals do not have that faculty to think for the future as such. So with regard to single-pointed concentration meditation and the developing special insight into the nature of things, these traditions were there in India even before the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, appeared. And the Buddha himself has said that, O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested for its purity by burning, rubbing and cutting, likewise you should examine my teaching thoroughly and then accept it, but not because you have devotion or faith in me. So this is a wonderful or an amazing advice or statement of the Buddha, which is not there in other religious traditions. Of course, I do respect all religious traditions. So there are no other religious traditions where the founding teacher has said that the followers should examine his or her teaching. But the Buddha has said his teaching should be examined and investigated. So in India, there was Nalanda monastic institution, and it developed into a monastic institution for learning Buddhism, and masters like Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, and so forth, who were marvelous teachers using who scrutinized the teaching of the Buddha himself. And Master Chandrakirti, in his entering the middle way, and towards the end of the Madhyamaka Avatara, has said that masters like Tignaka and Vasubandhu have actually abandoned the teaching or the tradition of Master Nagarjuna. This verse number 55 in the final chapter of Madhyamaka says, "This suchness, just explained, is most profound and terrifying, yet people with past habituation will certainly realize it. Others, however, despite vast learning, will fail to comprehend it." So these masters include the Vasubandhu and Nignaka and so forth. So there is not so much new knowledge, beneficial knowledge that we can take from the science, modern science. Of course, we learn things regarding the physical things, physics. Whereas from our tradition, we can actually share and contribute to the scientists regarding psychology. There's so much information that they can learn from us. The next verse, together a great store of merit and wisdom with little effort, rejoicing in virtue is praised as best, particularly regarding the past virtues collected by oneself. If you develop without arrogance great joy in your virtues of the past. So Tsongkhapa joined monastic institutions of learning in those days. And so he studied extensively in those monastic institutions of learning in those days. And then later, Lord Manjushri, in a vision to Tsongkhapa, said to him that mere study will not help. And when Tsongkhapa, at the advice of Lord Manjushri, decided to go into solitude with 8 of his main disciples, who were known as the 8 pure disciples. And many of the scholars at that time, some of the abbots and so forth, have said that the monks would talk behind them, criticize them if you left to live in solitude. And so when Tsongkhapa related this to the abbots and so forth, that people would criticize them, and it would actually, to go into hermitage, would actually hamper his service to sentient beings. And Lord Manjushri told him that whether you would be helpful or able to serve sentient beings and the Dharma or not, I would know better. So if people criticize you, practice patience. And so Rinpoche went into hermitage with his 8 pure disciples, and then one night he had a big dream of Master Nagarjuna surrounded by his 5 of his disciples. And in that dream, one of the disciples of Master Nagarjuna touched a text on the head of Tsongkhapa in his dream. And that next morning, when Tsongkhapa read the commentary on Buddha Palita, commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Buddha Palita, called the Buddha Palita Commentary, and he came to certain passage, and through which he was able to gain insights, true insight into emptiness. And at that point, he wrote the praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. And so here in this text, Tsongkhapa writes about his own life story, life account, as to how he pursued study of Buddhism, and then in the middle, how the teachings dawned as spiritual instruction to him. So, particularly regarding the past virtues collected by oneself, if you develop without the arrogance, great joy in your virtue of the past, it is said these virtues will increase even more. To accomplish this point of statement by the Victor Buddha, and also because I see many other purposes as well, it would be good, O mind, to feel such joy. So next verse, in the beginning I sought out extensive learning. In the middle, all teachings dawned as spiritual instruction. In the end, I practiced all day and all night. All this I dedicated for the spread of the teaching. Thinking this over. So, without using your critical intelligence or discernment, you will not be able to develop and progress further in your spiritual training. So it says in the next verse, right after quest of extensive learning, until the darkness of confusion so I think about so in the 6th chapter of Madhyamaka Avatara, the third last verse of the 6th chapter, I do have some expectation to reach there. So, verse number 224, chapter 6 says, thus illuminated by the rays of wisdom light, the Bodhisattva sees as clearly as a gooseberry on his open palm that the three rams in their entirety are unborn from their very start. And through the force of conventional truth, he journeys to cessation. So this is where His Holiness is saying that he expects or hopes to reach that cessation. And then the next two verses were read. So until the darkness of confusion about the points to adopt or reject is not dispelled by the lamp of perfect learning, if one cannot know even the path, what need to speak of entering the supreme city of liberation? Therefore, not content with a partial or superficial understanding of the treatises of the invincible Lord of Dharma, Maitreya, and of those great sages widely renowned in India as the 6 ornaments and 2 supreme ones, I studied them all in great detail. And so, the Tsongkhapa is saying that one should study these different treatises written by Indian masters thoroughly, without being partial, or without not just studying them partially or superficially, but thoroughly through logic and reasoning. So even if someone may be intelligent, but if he or she does not pursue further education and gain confidence in these teachings,
지금 탈와도 탑재심에 고바사디디 대회자네 아니 리그에 잡아차니 네버니고 지금 이두산에 양다 퇴배점에 마사와
So therefore, until the darkness of confusion, or if the darkness of confusion about the objects
젊으시고 순금들마도 슬라위나 아니 패지 코로나로미 거짓이 나요 봐. 슝카다 칸이야. 그 전전 나요 봐. 드스차디.
So if you study Rinpoche's texts, you would find how much he has studied regarding Buddhist philosophy, logic, and so forth. So therefore, not content with this. Therefore, especially for an ordinary,
강양 멀 진안 미시베 다외출의 정도 마소와 통내 하버루주 슌로기 사문 제베 차외직럼네
therefore not content with partial or superficial understanding of the treatises by the invincible Lord of Dharma Maitreya and by the great masters widely renowned as the 6 ornaments and 2 supreme ones. I studied them all in great detail. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. So, of course, regarding the Lamrim tradition, it is, of course, great teaching. But if you just have to follow on the basis of faith, saying that, oh, this must be followed because my teacher said so, and then that would not give you much impetus for making spiritual progress. But the Indian master's tradition of following the teaching through logic is much better for that. So I follow Master Chandra Kirti's tradition using logic and reasoning. And I would say, excuse me when it comes to some of the points that were taught by Vasubandhu in Abhidhamma Kosha Karika.
So
Solomon is going through the text, jumping. Especially for an ordinary person, a soul gateway to determine the precise reality of things. So therefore I entered the supreme vehicle of the victors, the Vajra vehicle, which is more rare than a Buddha, the profound treasury of the 2 feet, and I explored it at great length with much effort. I clearly saw that even if we decide that highest Yoga Tantra is supreme among all classes of Tantra, this remains a mere assertion if we do not know the path system of the 3 lower Tantras. So I familiarized myself at length with the general and specific classes of Tantra. So with regards to verse number 9, the next, within the second class, the performance Tantra, I studied the main Tantra, manifest enlightenment of Vairujana. I have particularly taken interest in studying this text and thoroughly ascertained every aspect pertaining to performance Tantra. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. Within the third class, the Yoga Tantra, verse number 10, I studied the main Tantra, the glorious compendium of reality. and explanatory Tantra of Vajra Peak, and so on. And I enjoyed the feast of Yoga Tantra. Think this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. As for that verse number 11, as for the fourth class, the highest Yoga Tantra I studied, the root Tantras, the explanatory Tantras, and others that are renowned among the Indian sages as the sun and the moon. Of the father Tantras, we are Samaja, and of the Yogini, mother Tantras, Hevajra and Chakrasambhara. I also studied the Stainless Light, a pioneering commentary that illuminates the Kala Chakra Tantra, a system of explanation different from the other sutras and tantras. So thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled, thank you very much, O noble Lord of wisdom treasure. This concludes the first section, how I initially sought out extensive learning. So during Rinpoche's Tsongkhapa's time, there were institutions of learning belonging to the Nyingma, Kagyu, and Sakya traditions, and he actually studied all of these different texts from these different traditions. And next, section number 2, how all the scriptures dawned as instructions. Verse number 12. Then with a firm, intense and enduring faith in Manjughosha, who best dispels the darkness from the mind of the disciples, I prayed for the scriptures to dawn on me as spiritual advice, and worked to accumulate all the requisite conditions, thinking this over, and so forth. And striving thus, I developed a unique conviction about the stages of the path to enlightenment that tradition passed down to from Nagarjuna and Asanga, and hence the perfection of wisdom sutras, the supreme scriptures on the profound, dawned upon me as scriptural advice. So with regard to the teachings that are contained in the Pali tradition, there are the practices which are taught in the first teaching of the Buddha and so forth, whereas in the study of logic is only there in the Sanskrit tradition. The texts on logic and epistemology and the Madhyamaka treatises. So hence the perfection of wisdom sutras, the supreme scriptures on the profound, dawned upon me as spiritual advice. So in the perfection of wisdom sutras, there are two, the contents are twofold, explicit and the implicit. So regarding the implicit content, there is a statement, have confidence or courage in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which teaches or indicates that of the practice of bodhicitta, whereas the teaching on emptiness is very explicit and taught in great detail. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. In this northern land, there are many who declare, whether they have studied the texts on logic or not, that there is no graduated practice leading to enlightenment in the compendium of valid cognition or the 7 treatises of pramana. So the compendium of valid cognition was written by Dignaga, Master Dignaga, and the 7 treatises on the pramana was written by Master Dharmakirti. But they also take as authority that Manjushri endorsed the composition of the compendium of valid cognition, which was in fact viewed by some as debating against the non-Buddhist scholars in order to defeat them in debate. When he explicitly said to Dignaga, write this text, in the future it will become like an eye for all wandering beings. So Master Dignaga's compendium, when he wrote some few lines to write about these text on logic and epistemology. So there is a story where it says that he wrote few lines and showed it to some scholars in those days in India, and people found that this is no use for enlightenment, but and they were said to have actually tied it on the tail of a dog. Recognizing these two views to be completely contradictory, I specifically examined the system of logic. The meaning of the homage in the Compendium of Valid Cognition is revealed by the Pramana Siddhi chapter, the chapter 2, establishing through the Pramana Vartika Karika, establishing through the forward and reverse reasoning that the Buddha is an authoritative guide for those seeking liberation. So in the Compendium of Valid Cognition, salutation verse, it mentions the Buddha to be an authoritative guide, someone who benefits sentient beings, the teacher, and so forth. Though that I found a deep conviction in that teaching, in that his teaching alone is the entryway for those in pursuit of complete freedom. And I found special joy in the fact that the essential aspects of the path relating to both the foundational and universal vehicles are made accessible by the method of logical reasoning. And then verse number 15, then through the hard and methodical work of combining the two texts, the level of Bodhisattvas and ornament of sutras, level of Bodhisattvas written by Asanga and ornament of sutras written by Maitreya. So these two texts, combining these two texts, gives you a very clear picture of the progression along the path. All the treatises of the invisible Lord of Dharma and his followers dawned to me as instructions for my practice. Thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. In particular, by relying on the compendium of training that provides certainty about all these essential aspects of the path, by arranging the topics of the profound and extensive scriptures in a specific order, I could clearly see the stages to be followed in practicing the content of the many excellent treatises by Nagarjuna, such as the Compendium of Sutras, and so forth. Then, by relying on Buddha Guha as lucidly explained, quintessential advice on the later concentration and the manifest enlightenment of Vairocana, all the essential aspects of the path dawned as instructions. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. Since seeing how the essentials of the path in the compendium of reality are contained in the three samadhis was not so difficult, but knowing how hard it is to realize how to meditate on the profound, I relied on the correct explanation of the great Pandita Buddha Guha, which integrates root, explanatory, and combined yoga tantras and elucidates the stages by which to familiarize oneself with the profound practice of the three lower classes of tantra, and it dispelled the darkness of confusion in my mind. Thinking this over, thank you very much. Ultimately, among the well-spoken teaching of the sage, the Buddha is the glorious highest yoga tantra, of which the greatest and the most profound is the king of tantras, glorious Guya Samaja. Verse number 19. Next one. On this, the supreme philosopher Nagarjuna has said that the essentials of the path concealed in the root tantra by the way of 6 limits and 4 modes, so they must be understood by following the explanatory tantras and through the oral instructions of a master. Viewing this as essential, I acquainted myself at length with the different texts of Nagarjuna's tradition of Guya Samaja, and the ultimate pith instruction contained in the concise sadhana and the lamp of concise practices and graded presentation. So concise sadhana, written by Master Nagarjuna, lamp of concise practice, written by Aryadeva, and then graded presentations. relying on the commentary that illuminates the root tantra like a lamp. I compared these with the 5 explanatory tantras and studied them intensely. Through this effort, I came to understand the 2 stages of Gurya Samaja in general and the essential aspects of the completion stage in particular. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, O noble Lord, wisdom treasure. By dint of this, verse number 20, the essential points of the many tantras such as Samvara, Hevajra and Kalachakra dawned on me as instructions. I have already explained this elsewhere. Here, I just briefly mentioned it for the discerning. Thinking this over, how well my destiny was fulfilled. Thank you very much, Lord, wisdom treasure. This concludes the second section, showing how in the middle all the scriptures dawned as instructions. As I already explained, how Master Tsongkhapa studied extensively first and then went to live a life of a hermit and practiced. So as he had the expectation and the hope in the beginning, he was able to have the experience of the stages of the path and the profound and extensive paths. He was able to develop them, and therefore he wrote the texts on the 5 texts on Madhyamaka philosophy, commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara called the Illumination of the Intent, and then the Ocean of Reasoning, commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and also his insight section of the Lamrim Chemo and the Middle Length Lamrim, these 2 sections, and then that of the essence of eloquence. And then he wrote commentary on Abhisamaya Alankara and its allied sutras, which are following the 21 commentaries of Indian masters, and wrote the Golden Rosary. And so in those days, there were many great masters from the Sakya and Kagyu and Nyingma traditions, many great learned masters. For example, if you read Sakya Kambum, the collected works of Sakya masters, you will see how great those masters had been. And then there were Kadamba masters also, and then Nyingma masters, for example, Longchen Ramjampa, and his 7 treasuries. I have received the reading transmission of them. These follow great Indian treatises as well. So great works of Master Longchen Ramjampa. And Rinpoche traveled from Amdo, his native land, to central Tibet, just carrying a bag on his... and then he entered monastic institutions at that time in the central of Tibet, central part of Tibet, Sakya and so forth. And then he became a practitioner and gained experience, and then founded the Garden Monastery, and his masters, his disciples like Jezabje, Kedubje, Gedentrup, and so forth. And Gyaltsab Dharma Rinchen later became the first successor to Rinpoche's throne at Garden. The first. And then there has been a very excellent tradition in the Gelug tradition to study for many years in the monastic institutions of Seragat and Drepung, and then go into the tantric study of Tantra, and join the Gyudo and Gyume monasteries, in which you take responsibilities, and finally you qualify to become a Gaden Tripa, the throne holder of Gaden, the head of the Gelug tradition. So in those days, in the past, there were few people who were quite critical about Jetsun Buche's tradition. And Master Gedundrup, the first Dalai Lama, was one of the disciples of Tsongkhapa, and he found the Dashilhumpa monastery. So Ngorchen Kun Sang and others were quite critical at that time of Gedundrup, as Master Gedundrup's in the peak of the Eastern Mountain says, there are some people who where he mentions that some people who claim to be proponents or the custodians of the Dharma, but see other custodians of the Dharma to be enemies. So the Gedundrup established Dashilhumpa monastery, and he established the study of Brahmana texts on logic and epistemology as a main study. So in our tradition, we have we follow the tradition of memorizing the root text and then attending classes with teachers where we are taught the meaning of these texts word by word, and then also through logical reasoning. So today, if Master Vasubandhu were to come to our monastic institutions, these seats of learning, Vasubandhu would be facing a lot of challenges, and through logic, not being able to hold on to his position, perhaps. So in today's world, regarding Buddhism, the complete teaching of the Buddha, where particularly where we have the tradition of studying the teaching of the Buddha in terms of Madhyamaka philosophy and through logic and reasoning, it is only amongst our tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that we have such marvelous heritage that we have preserved thanks to the past religious kings and also the great translators and masters of the different traditions, and particularly Master Tsongkhapa. So thanks to all these great personalities, Tibetan personalities in the past, that today we can see that the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism is the most sophisticated and of the best quality of the teaching of Buddha. And so the monastic institutions, the monks in these great monastic institutions of Seragat and Drepung, Tashlembu and so forth, we should follow in the footsteps of Master Tsongkhapa, and regarding how he pursued the study of the Dharma extensively. So we have, of course, great scholars from these monastic institutions. Continuously, we are producing these great scholars. And in India, particularly, there are more and more number of people taking interest in the teaching of the Buddha. Of course, in our monastic institutions, we do study the teaching, we do teach these different texts, taking for granted that people who come to our teachings or in our classes, are all Buddhists. But if we could also teach what we have to others without having to confine them to Buddhism as such, whether they are Buddhist or not, whether they are religious people or believers of religion or not, we should be able to find a way to share our knowledge and the tradition to other people who have interest in studying our tradition. So when you teach the general public, do not think that you are actually propagating the Gelug tradition or the Buddhist tradition as such, but teach these different subjects to help people gain more insight into the nature of things through logic and reasoning as an education or academic subject. So as we have requested, Your Holiness has kindly consented to our request to give teaching to our... So it has been 15 years since we first started your teaching with the Tibetan youth. So you have been teaching. Thank you very much, Your Holiness, for your teaching today on the Destiny Fulfilled. So we have questions from 12 different questions from different students. The first question is from Tenzin Sering, grade 12, Commerce stream from TCV Bailakupi, Tibetan Children's Village School in Bailakupi. With due respect to Your Holiness, my question is, as a Buddhist, how should we, during this grave pandemic situation in the world, and particularly in India, in order to avoid mental distress? So, regarding this pandemic that has spread all over the world, and particularly in India, which is the situation here is quite grave, and many people are having mental disturbance and problems. So, of course, sickness and diseases cause physical difficulty, whereas there's also a mental difficulty or problem that we face. When you have fear about this pandemic, or even if you are not inflicted by the disease, your anxiety and fear, when you have these, what we can do is, of course, we as Buddhists believe in life after life, future and past and future lives. As Jenabuche says, Tsongkhapa says, in the three principal aspects of the path. So I'm not able to remember, but
nangita semge nasorveta semge kanda nyomung toksumji yeba indusane.
So because we have the three afflictions of desire, hatred, or anger, and ignorance, as Buddhists, these three poisons that are within ourselves, we need, of course, we should have this courage or determination to reach enlightenment, whereby we would have been able to overcome all three poisons from our mind stream. And so the disease, overcoming the disease, is part of the process of journeying to enlightenment. So because the diseases and come from our karma and the mental afflictions, so to overcome them, as Master Nagarjuna says, eliminating karma and delusions, there is nirvana or liberation. And karma and delusions arise from conceptual thoughts. And these in turn arise, rooted in our fabrications. So the sufferings of birth, sickness, aging, and death are there as part of our life, existential life. And when you think about the pandemic, you should have the determination to reach enlightenment or liberation, whereby you overcome both the karma and delusions, these mental afflictions. And so when you, even if you have the diseases, you should still be able to have the determination or the courage to say that may I be free from all these diseases and the karma and the delusions through this sickness that I experience now. So when you face difficulties in life, you should be able to transform them into these difficulties into the paths to enlightenment. As it is said in Lama Chepa. So diseases and sicknesses should serve as cleansing factors for our karma and delusions. Next question comes from Suja TCV Schools, Ngawang Jigme, from TCV Suja. First of all, my due respects to Your Holiness. I feel very fortunate to see you and hear your teaching. So, of course, if you commit some non-virtuous action, you have also the practice of confession, disclosing your wrongdoings in front of the objects of refuge, or three refuges, and so forth. And of course, this practice of confession is in all religious traditions. And so, in the Destiny Fulfilled, it is mentioned so through your study, reflection, and meditation, what you should be able to do is transform yourself, your mind, and become disciplined. And so the best way of purifying your negativities and accumulate merits is through the practice of bodhicitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment. As it is said by Kadamba masters, this alone can help you purify your negativities, and this alone can help you accumulate merit and wisdom. So the bodhicitta itself can help both purification and accumulation of merit and wisdom. So without, of course, the practices of 3 trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom, even if you may do great, extensive practices of making offerings and doing prostrations and so forth, making offerings, these would turn into worldly or mundane concerns, would just be mundane concerns. Whereas Jesu Milarepa left a life like a beggar, and he had no resources to make offerings of hundreds and thousands of butter lamps and so forth. But he lived in his hermitage, meditating on deity yoga practices and so forth. So the main practice for our purification and the accumulation of merit are twofold. The extensive path of bodhicitta and the profound path or the view of emptiness. So there is no greater factor for purification and accumulation of merit and wisdom than these doing these practices of bodhicitta and its allied practices and the profound view of emptiness. So whenever I wake up and think of benefiting others in my practice, I follow these lines of taking refuge and the bodhicitta, where it says, in the interest of oneself and others and so forth. Next is Tenzin Sepel from Selakui TCB. So many different insects and animals die because of human actions. Is it sinful to kill insects and bugs and etc. unknowingly or whatever when another person coerces you to do it? So when it comes to creating karma, there are karmas which are intentionally done, and there are those which are not done intentionally. So, of course, when we do some work or we work, we are not thinking of killing animals or bugs and these worms and so forth that are underground. So, if you are not doing the actions unintentional, it may be done, but you have not done it intentionally. So there you accrue some karmic imprint, but it is not intentional. So because you did not have the motivation or the intention to kill those worms and so forth in the field, and then the soldiers kill other people, other enemies, other soldiers of the but these actually could also be considered as the actions that are accumulated but not intentional, because they follow orders from their superiors. So if you somehow have the intention to kill somebody, some insect or some worms or animals, so that intention, having the intention to kill someone is worse than just doing the action without knowing. And so you may do some action, but they may not be intentional. So when a farmer works in his field, of course, in the process of working in the field, the farmer kills worms and so forth. But if the person knows that he would be killing these animals unintentionally, still he could purify the negativity through recitation of mantra and so forth. Next, Pasang Tashi, school prefect from TCV Chandra. In the fields surrounded, the land surrounded by snow mountains, the long life prayer of His Holiness, the one was, Your Holiness, please explain how we should practice science and philosophical tenets taught in Buddhist literature. So this is important. So one of my commitments is for peace and to create a peaceful world. The 7 billion people, the 7+ billion people, I pray for everyone to have love and compassion, and I also put effort. I do not pray for all of the 7 billion people to become Buddhists. And it may not be practical as well to pray for such. So my main effort is to create a peaceful world, free from violence. Because if you harm others through your anger, jealousy, and so forth, therefore, if you promote love and compassion, these harmful actions would automatically cease. When I have interactions with scientists, even the scientists also pay attention to peace of mind. Peace actually has to come through mental peace, peace within ourselves. Whereas if you are full of emotion, negative emotions, such as anger, attachment, and so forth, you cannot have peace of mind at all. So how can you have peace outside? So in Shantideva says, if you are not able to exchange your joy and happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching Buddhahood. Even in this cycle of existence, you will not have happiness. So if you are selfishly motivated and disregard others' happiness, you will not be happy. If you do not exchange your joy and happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching Buddhahood, even in samsara, you will not have happiness. Whatever joy there is, whatever suffering there is in the world, all come from wishing oneself to be happy. Whatever joy and happiness there is in the world, all come through wishing others to be happy. So, with a sense of oneness of humanity, just as you yourself do not want suffering but want happiness, all other human brothers and sisters are in the same situation, are the same in not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. And so through this kind of understanding, you can create peace of mind through love and compassion, and that also helps our physical health as well. And so the scientists do not talk about religion, but they consider peace of mind to be very important. So the So this scientists, neuroscientists also talk about peace, physical good health, good physical health when you have
social animal race, social animal. So social animal.
So they say that human beings are social animals. So since we are social animals, our own happiness and well-being are dependent on others right at birth. If we had not been taken care of our mothers, then we will not be able to survive. And so because of love and care of our family, mother, and so forth, the child survives. And this family survives because of people in the community, and the community survives because of the larger world community and so forth. And so for peace of mind, which is disturbed by our attachment, anger, and so forth. So many scientists are becoming aware of these. Therefore, since peace of mind is very important, we should know the workings of our mind and emotions, how the attachment, anger, and so forth disturb our peace of mind, and how love and compassion are important to counter them. And so for peace of mind, of course, the Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy is helpful for the scientists without having to talk about the past and future lives or nirvana and so forth, or the omniscient state. Christians do not talk about past and future lives, but they do whatever they do in order to please or to follow the will of God. And so helping others, benefiting others is taught by all religious traditions, and even people who do not believe in religion do talk about helping others. So by reducing or decreasing our love, our attachment, anger, and so forth, even scientists are able to say that we can actually help our problems, solve our problems. And I have been having discussions with scientists for a long time now. So we can learn about brain, workings of the brain to the scientists, and from our Buddhist psychology, we can contribute to the Buddhism, to the scientists. So the philosophical tenets of Buddhism from the Buddhist literature, this has relation to quantum physics. In quantum physics, they talk about things appearing as if they have some objective existence out there, but they say that it's much related to our perception. So this has some relation to the Buddhist philosophy. So in our tradition, we say everything is merely designated by our conceptual mind. So because of our attachment to loved ones and because of our hatred towards those who we consider as our adversaries and enemies, so these have some connection with modern physics or quantum physics and Buddhist philosophy. So both say that things have no objective existence from their side. This is related to teaching of emptiness, on emptiness, and the teaching on how things are explained as being merely designated, dependent designation. In the Madhyamaka Avatara, it says, verse number 34 of so if the intrinsic characteristics of things were to arise independently, things would come to be destroyed by denying it. Emptiness would then be a cause for the destruction of things, but this is illogical. So no real entities exist. This shows that how the logical absurdity of how an Arya being's direct perception of emptiness would be a destroyer of entities. And then there are other logical absurdities that are mentioned by the next verses. Verse number 35, 36, 37, and 38. How conventional things would withstand ultimate reasoned analysis of into the nature of things, and how and Master Nagarjuna's that conventional truth would withstand the analysis of reasoning minds, probing the ultimate nature, that the absolute production of things cannot be denied, and that the Buddha's statement, phenomena like self-existence, would not hold true. So these four logical absurdities. And then Master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Karika, chapter 22, says, in Ratnavali says, a person is neither the earth, water, fire, and so forth. If not all these, what else is a person? And so understanding the view of emptiness helps to reduce our negative emotions. Next question comes from Debatso, a girl from the Dalai Lama Institute of Higher Studies in Bangalore. With due respect to Your Holiness, of course, our monastics have lots of studies of Buddhism through these different treatises. However, Your Holiness, do you see it important for the lay people to have a handbook on Buddhism, which serves as a daily guide to their spiritual practice, their way of thinking, and their behavior? So, as I said before, the 7 billion people, 7 billion plus people on this earth, if in order to create a loving and compassionate community of 7 billion people without having to believe in past and future lives or nirvana and so forth, but by educating them to create an amicable society, a community, this is something related to everyone, whether you are lay people or monastics, male or female, doesn't matter, because you want peace of mind. So those who have interest in such a handbook, if you could put some effort in bringing out such a handbook, not teaching others about religion as such, but to help them not to be overwhelmed by this very coarse negative emotions of attachment, anger, and so forth. So if you could, I mean, it may be possible that there's such a book would be produced. So those interested, if you could also write such books, if you are not able to do it on your own, you could still have discussions with people who understand psychology, the workings of our mind and emotions. So collaborative work could be good. Through the modern technology, we have this internet, so you can have virtual discussions. If you are able to do more of these discussions, it would be very beneficial, of course. So this is not only about making transformation of our mind in our mind. It's not only a concern of monks and nuns. So monks and nuns also have these negative emotions like attachment, anger, and so forth. On top of that, they also have sometimes the religious sectarianism. So if you could have discussions with other people to bring out such a book, it would be very beneficial. Next question comes from it's from TCV Gopalpur, School Prefect, Class 12, and School Prefect Chinle Tseten. In the land surrounded by snow-capped mountains, the source of benefit and good. Avalokiti Shora in person, Tenzin Gyatso. So in the three principal aspects of the path, it is said, by contemplating repeatedly the infallible nature of karma and suffering of cyclic existence, hankering to the pleasure of next life will come to cease. So my question is, please explain how a common person who has no understanding of the Dharma practice so as to stop hankering to the pleasures of the next life. So these lines shows the practice pertaining to the stages of the path to enlightenment. But in that same text, you also find this So verse number 7 and 8 of the three principal aspects of the path says they are being swept away constantly by the four rivers, powerful rivers. They are bound tightly with fetters of karma, most difficult to escape. They are trapped inside the iron mesh of self-grasping. They are enveloped from everywhere by the thick mist of ignorance. They take birth within cyclic existence that has no end, where they are endlessly tormented by the three sufferings. By reflecting on all your mothers who suffer such conditions, please generate the supreme awakening minds. So regarding myself, of course I'm born in this samsara now, but I could boast to you that I am not trapped inside the iron mesh of self-grasping. And by thinking about emptiness, relying on Master Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara in his commentaries, auto-commentary, I can say that I'm not enveloped or enshrouded by this thick mist of ignorance. And I also hope to reach that of the true cessation, liberation. And in the 6th chapter of Madhyamaka Avatara, it says that thus illuminated by the rays of wisdom's light, and so forth. And in the last line it says, and through the force of the conventional truth, he journeys to cessation. So a person who was born in Amdo, and who follow Master Nagarjuna's tradition by following Master Chandrakirti's texts, I can feel that this ignorance within me is somehow becoming thinner and thinner. Therefore, I feel that by reflecting on my own condition, I can feel that I'm not totally overwhelmed by suffering through that understanding and insight and experience of emptiness. But I can still feel compassion towards sentient beings who are the mother sentient beings who suffer this such condition of cyclic existence. And so on your part also, you could think that by reflecting on your own condition of suffering, such suffering, may I generate that of the thought of renunciation. And then that is switching the verse number 8, the first final two lines to your, in relation to yourself, relating them to yourself, without having to say all mothers. And then you can also say the same thing applies to other sentient beings by reflecting on all your mothers who are suffering such conditions. Please generate supreme mind. So next comes from Gama Chodron, from TCV, Upper TCV. With due respect to your Holiness, many people believe that material advancements can eradicate all our problems difficult. However, it does not eliminate mental problems. So please teach us how we can overcome our mental distress and achieve happiness. So I have already explained this briefly earlier. What disturbs our peace of mind is it's not only our physical illness and diseases that afflict us. Even though you may be physically healthy, but there are people whose minds are disturbed, and they have all the resources, amenities, medical amenities, and so forth. But because of not having a good, disciplined mind, they are disturbed emotionally. And therefore we need emotional hygiene, for which there is nothing that we can learn from the Western traditions, science, and so forth. But regarding mental hygiene, we have the means to deal with it, to cultivate or experience it based in the Indian traditions, and particularly Buddhism. So by learning about the Indian tradition of understanding the mind and emotions, it will definitely help us to deal with our attachment, anger, and so forth. I do not tell people to become Buddhist or religious, but tell people to learn from Buddhist tradition how to counter our attachment, anger, lust, and so forth, based on Buddhist tradition teachings, and particularly Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the chapter number 6, which teaches about the great disadvantages and shortfalls or shortcomings of anger. And then chapter 8, which teaches us how to counter how to see the disadvantages and shortcomings of self-cherishing attitude and the advantages of cherishing others over oneself. And so chapter 6, to counter our anger. If we read these two chapters, chapter 6 and chapter 8 of Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, even if you may not be a believer in a religion, if you read and reflect on these teachings, you will find them useful. But unless you give thought to what you read in these two chapters, even if you may have the text right beside you on your bed, it will not help. So whatever you learn from these books and the teachings, you need to reflect on them and feel conviction, gain conviction in these teachings. And through your reflection, you gain conviction, and then based on that, firm belief and firm confidence in the teaching, then you should meditate and integrate the teaching within yourself. So Tibetans usually are said to be not being enthusiastic about taking lives of others and being aggressive and rude to others. But Tibetans are viewed by other people as being more calm and compassionate. So in the society, when we talk about love and compassion and peace of mind, if we could create an atmosphere in our society where people have such awareness, it would be helpful. In our society, of course, right from our childhood, we are made aware that killing other animals, bugs, and so forth is sinful. And so we have such a positive culture in our tradition to avoid killing and so forth. But as I explained before, Bodhisattvacharya Avatara would be very good to read, to go deeper into the practice of compassion, love, and patience and peace of mind. So I do reflect on this text, the teachings that are found in Bodhisattvacharya Avatara on a daily basis. In the land surrounded by snow-capped mountains, the source of all good and happiness is Tenzin Gyatso, the gender-seeking person. May you live until the end of samsara. See you tomorrow. Thank you, and see you.